Rick Sanchez wakes up every day with the same familiar ache sitting somewhere between his chest and his mind. It is not a sharp ache. It does not announce itself loudly. It does not stop him from moving. It is a dull and constant heaviness that he has learned to live with. The kind of heaviness that comes from a wound he refuses to look at directly. Rick tells the universe he does not care. He tells everyone around him that nothing matters. He tells himself he is beyond suffering. But beneath the sarcasm, the confidence, and the impossible intelligence, there is a truth that follows him everywhere. Rick cannot forgive himself. This inability has shaped him more than any invention he has built. It has driven him across galaxies. It has influenced every relationship he has ever had. It has become the silent engine that powers his restlessness. Rick moves constantly because stillness forces him to face the things he has done, the people he has lost, and the person he has become. He avoids forgiveness because forgiveness would require him to admit how deeply he has been hurt and how deeply he has hurt others. He avoids it because self-reflection is more terrifying to him than any cosmic threat. Rick's inability to forgive himself did not begin with one event. It was built slowly, layer after layer, over a lifetime of decisions that left scars on others and even deeper scars on himself. He carries memories he never speaks about. Some are filled with loss. Some are filled with regret. Some are filled with anger he could not control. Rick tells himself that regret is pointless, but regret is not something he can erase with logic. It lingers in the quiet corners of his mind. It finds him when the portal gun is silent and the house is dark and there is nowhere left to run. Rick's heart is not empty, it is wounded, and that wound affects everything he touches. He pushes people away because closeness reminds him of the family he lost. He mocks sentiment because sentiment reminds him of the times he cared too deeply. He dismisses vulnerability because vulnerability has always brought him pain. Rick has spent years pretending that emotional detachment is strength, but the truth is that his detachment is a shield. It protects him from the guilt he carries. It keeps him from facing the truth that he is afraid of being known, afraid of being forgiven, afraid that forgiveness would unmask the depth of his own self-hatred. Rick cannot forgive himself because he believes he does not deserve forgiveness. He blames himself for the death of versions of his wife and daughter. He blames himself for abandoning countless realities. He blames himself for creating harm in the name of curiosity. He blames himself for every friendship destroyed by his inability to change, and while he will never say these things out loud, they shape the way he lives. They turn tenderness into discomfort. They turn kindness into suspicion. They turn moments of love into moments of fear. Rick hides this fear behind intelligence. He relies on brilliance because brilliance never fails him the way people have. He trusts science because science cannot leave him. He throws himself into new discoveries because discoveries distract him from the ache he refuses to confront. Rick uses his mind as armor. He uses his inventions as escape routes. He uses humor as a way to redirect attention away from his pain. Every time he insults others, every time he destroys expectation, every time he throws himself into danger, he is avoiding something deeper. He is avoiding the possibility that forgiveness could change him. Forgiveness, for Rick, is dangerous. It threatens the identity he built from cynicism and defiance. It threatens the story he tells himself about why he must keep distance from everyone. If he forgave himself, he would no longer have a reason to run. He would no longer have a reason to isolate himself. He would no longer have a reason to cling to nihilism. Forgiveness would remove his excuses. And without those excuses, Rick would face a truth he has spent his entire life trying to escape. The truth that he still wants to be loved. The truth that he still wants connection. The truth that he still carries hope in small, hidden places. Rick cannot handle that truth. So instead, he keeps moving. He travels to distant dimensions not because he craves adventure, but because adventure keeps him from sitting still long enough to feel. He drinks not because he enjoys it, but because it numbs the thoughts that grow louder when he is sober. He argues with his family not because he wants to hurt them, but because closeness scares him more than conflict. Rick believes he is protecting them by keeping emotional distance. In reality, he is protecting himself. And yet, for all his avoidance, there are moments when the cracks show, moments when the armor slips and the wounded man underneath becomes visible, when Rick comforts Morty after trauma, when he apologizes softly without being asked, when he looks at Beth with regret instead of arrogance, when he hesitates before leaving. These moments reveal the truth he cannot speak. Rick cares. Rick feels. Rick wants to be forgiven, but he cannot forgive himself long enough to believe he deserves that warmth. The conflict inside him is constant. He wants connection, but connection reminds him of everything he has lost. He wants to protect the family he finally has again, but he fears that closeness will end in the same kind of grief he once endured. He wants Morty to trust him, but he believes he is not worth trusting. Rick pushes and pulls at the people he loves because he lives in a state of emotional contradiction. He wants to be needed, yet he fears being depended on. He wants to be seen, yet he fears being understood. He wants to be forgiven, yet he fears facing the reasons forgiveness is necessary. Rick punishes himself by living as though he has no future. He makes choices that put him in danger because part of him believes he deserves to be hurt. He tests the limits of his own survival, not out of bravery, but out of a twisted form of self-punishment. He risks his life because living with guilt feels heavier than any physical threat. Rick's recklessness is not impulsivity. It is despair disguised as action. His guilt also shapes the way he treats love. When people care about him, Rick withdraws. When people need him, he avoids responsibility. When people forgive him, he becomes defensive, not because he does not want love, but because he believes that allowing love into his life again would inevitably lead to pain. He has convinced himself that love is temporary, that connection is fragile, and that nothing he builds can survive the weight of who he is. This belief prevents him from seeing the truth that his family still wants him, flaws and all. Rick cannot forgive himself because he carries a version of himself in his mind that no one else sees. A version defined by failure, a version shaped by grief, a version frozen in the moment he lost everything. He believes that version still defines him, no matter how many adventures he has or how much he tries to change. Rick lives in the shadow of a past he never confronted. And because he never confronted it, it grows larger every year. The tragedy of Rick Sanchez is that he is capable of love, but he cannot receive it. He is capable of change, but he cannot believe in it. He is capable of healing, but he cannot allow himself to start. Every tender moment he shares with his family is followed by distance. Every victory is followed by guilt. Every connection is followed by withdrawal. Rick lives in cycles, and those cycles are fueled by the belief that forgiveness would be an admission of vulnerability he cannot afford. At night, when the house is quiet and the portal gun has been set down, Rick sits alone with thoughts he never says aloud. He remembers the faces of people he lost. He remembers versions of himself he despises. He remembers moments where he could have chosen differently. He remembers times when he was cruel, not because he wanted to be, but because he did not know how to be gentle. In these moments, the truth is painfully clear. Rick cannot forgive himself because forgiveness requires him to feel everything he has been trying to avoid for decades: pain, regret, longing, grief, and love. He is afraid of love because it reminds him of loss. He is afraid of grief because it reminds him of what he used to have. He is afraid of peace because he does not believe he deserves it. And he is afraid of himself because he fears what he might see if he looks too closely. Yet despite everything, the fact that he cannot forgive himself reveals something profound. Rick still has a conscience. He still feels guilt. He still cares enough to hurt. A person who truly believed nothing mattered would not feel this way. Rick's inability to forgive himself is proof that he is not the nihilistic monster he pretends to be. He is a wounded man who has lived too long with too much pain and too little compassion. He is someone who wants redemption, but does not know how to reach for it. One day, Rick may begin to forgive himself. It will not happen with a dramatic revelation. It will not happen with a single act of kindness. It will happen slowly through small moments when he allows someone to care for him without pushing them away. It will happen through moments when he chooses vulnerability over escape. It will happen through moments when he lets love stay instead of running from it. But for now, Rick continues to live with his wound. He hides it behind jokes, inventions, and indifference. But it is there shaping him, and until he faces it, forgiveness will remain just out of reach. Rick Sanchez has spent most of his life outrunning mirrors, not the physical kind, the reflective glass he walks past without thinking, but the mirrors that form in moments of honesty, the mirrors that appear when someone looks at him with sincerity, the mirrors created by quiet nights where the universe seems still enough to hear his heartbeat. He avoids these mirrors because they show him something he cannot bear to confront. They show him that beneath the genius, beneath the arrogance, beneath the cosmic bravado he wears like armor, he is painfully human. Being human means he is capable of longing. Being human means he is capable of hurting. Being human means he is capable of wanting love after losing it. And Rick cannot forgive himself because acknowledging his humanity means acknowledging the depth of the pain he carries. When Rick looks at himself honestly, he sees contradictions everywhere. He is someone who claims nothing matters, yet he cannot ignore the echoes of emotion that follow him through every reality he enters. He claims people slow him down, yet the thought of losing them terrifies him. He claims he is better off alone, yet he cannot tolerate loneliness for more than a few hours before seeking distraction. His humanity refuses to disappear, no matter how much he tries to bury it beneath complexity and chaos. Rick avoids emotional mirrors because they show him the truth about his past. He carries memories he does not talk about, the kind of memories that make his chest tighten whenever he is forced to sit still. He remembers a family he once had, a life he once cared about, a version of himself that believed in connection before everything shattered. The mirror shows him the man he was and the man he became, and the contrast between the two fills him with a guilt he cannot escape. This guilt shapes the way he treats the world now. He isolates himself because he believes he lost the right to be loved. He avoids commitment because he fears becoming vulnerable again. He pushes people away because caring about them brings back the ache of losing the ones he could not save. Rick's humanity also reveals the consequences of his actions. He has hurt people without meaning to. He has hurt people while meaning to. He has left destruction in his wake not because he enjoys it, but because he moves through life too quickly to avoid it. When he looks at the emotional mirrors life holds up to him, he sees the pain he caused Morty, the disappointment he caused Beth, the frustration he caused Summer, the destruction he caused to countless versions of himself across the multiverse. He claims not to care about these consequences, but when the nights are quiet and the distractions fade, he feels the weight of them pressing into him. Rick cannot forgive himself because the mirror shows him the cost of his choices. Rick also avoids seeing his vulnerability reflected back at him. Vulnerability is something he despises in himself, not because it is weak, but because it reminds him of a time when he trusted others with his heart. That trust was shattered. The details of how vary across interpretations and timelines, but the emotional truth remains the same. Rick loved someone and lost them, and that loss became the gravitational center of his life. Every decision he makes now is influenced by that gravity. When the mirror shows him that vulnerability still exists inside him, he turns away. He refuses to acknowledge that part of him because compassion makes him feel exposed, and exposure brings the risk of being hurt again. Rick's humanity also makes him face the truth about time. Time has taken things from him that he can never get back. Youth, innocence, trust, connection, a version of life that might have been peaceful. Rick's refusal to forgive himself stems partly from his belief that he wasted too much time being the wrong version of himself. He sees the years he spent running from his pain, the years he spent denying his emotions, the years he spent hiding from love, and he feels guilt for every moment he lost. The mirror does not show him the multiverse he conquered, it shows him the years he cannot repair. Another reason Rick cannot face his own humanity is that it reveals his longing for redemption. He does not believe he deserves redemption, but a part of him wants it anyway. A part of him wants his family to see something good in him. A part of him wants Morty to look up to him without disappointment. A part of him wants Beth to forgive the father he was not. A part of him wants peace. Rick's longing for redemption is painful because it contradicts everything he tells himself about how the world works. If nothing matters, then why does he ache for connection? If no one is trustworthy, then why does he keep returning to the same people? If he deserves isolation, then why does he feel devastated when he is excluded? His humanity confronts him with questions he does not want to answer. Rick avoids emotional mirrors because his humanity reveals how deeply he depends on others, despite insisting he does not. He depends on Morty to ground him, even when he resents that dependence. He depends on Beth to remind him that he still has a family, even when the relationship is fractured. He depends on Summer's growing confidence to keep the family balanced, even when he pretends he is not paying attention. He depends on Jerry's steady presence more than he admits, because Jerry represents something Rick cannot replicate with inventions or brilliance. Jerry represents emotional stability. Rick's humanity forces him to admit that he needs people, and that admission terrifies him. Rick's inability to forgive himself also comes from the fear that if he allowed himself to heal, he would lose the identity he built to survive. His cynicism protects him, his arrogance shields him, his brilliance distracts him, his humor keeps people away from the scars he hides. If Rick forgave himself, he would have to redefine who he is without the self-punishment that has shaped him for decades. The mirror shows him a version of himself who could have been gentle, hopeful, open, and capable of love. That possibility hurts him because it was taken from him, whether by his own hand or by tragedy. Rick cannot forgive himself because part of him believes forgiveness would betray the version of himself who suffered. Even though Rick avoids these mirrors, life still forces them in front of him from time to time. When Morty stands up to him, Rick sees the impact his influence has had. When Beth shows him affection, Rick sees the family he lost reflected in the family he has now. When Summer confronts him with honesty, he sees the distortion between the person he pretends to be and the person they need him to be. When Jerry shows him patience, Rick sees a softness he cannot understand. These mirrors appear briefly, giving Rick a glimpse of the man beneath the genius, the man who is tired, the man who is hurt, the man who is lonely. Rick hates these moments, not because they are painful, but because they are true. He feels exposed, seen, understood, and understanding is something that frightens him far more than any alien species or cosmic crisis. Rick can face danger with confidence because danger is external. Emotional truth is internal. He cannot outthink it. He cannot destroy it. He cannot escape it with a portal gun. Rick's humanity also reveals the grief he carries for relationships he has destroyed. He has pushed away people who cared about him. He has broken trust. He has walked out on commitments. He has chosen self-preservation over connection. These choices protect him from pain in the moment, but they deepen his guilt in the long run. Rick cannot forgive himself because he knows the pain he has caused cannot be undone with inventions or apologies. He believes he must carry that shame forever as punishment for failing the people he loved. At night, Rick sometimes sits in the garage with the lights off, staring at his inventions without really seeing them. In these rare, quiet moments, the emotional mirror he avoids so desperately forces itself into view. He sees the truth of his life reflected back at him. He sees the loneliness, the guilt, the longing, the self-hatred. He sees the boy he used to be, the man he became, and the father he failed to be. These moments break him a little more each time, yet he hides them with jokes and arrogance when the sun rises. Rick's humanity is not a flaw. It is a sign that he has a conscience. It is proof that he is not the monster he claims to be. But Rick cannot forgive himself because forgiveness requires belief in growth, belief in redemption, belief in the possibility that his life can change. Rick fears that believing in these things will only lead to disappointment, so he keeps himself locked in cycles of self-punishment instead. One day, Rick may be brave enough to look into the mirror fully. One day, he may see that being human is not a weakness, that vulnerability is not failure, that love is not a trap, that forgiveness is not surrender. But for now, Rick avoids the mirror. He walks past it quickly, pretending not to see the reflection that reveals everything he tries to hide. And until he confronts that reflection, he will continue to live with the guilt he believes he deserves. Rick Sanchez carries memories that he treats like radioactive material. He seals them inside mental vaults he never opens. He surrounds them with distraction, noise, invention, chaos, anything that keeps him from approaching them directly. To the outside world, Rick seems fearless, unstoppable, unshakable, but these buried memories are the one thing he cannot face without trembling inside. They are the echo of a life he once lived, a life he once cared about, and a life that shattered so completely that remembering it feels dangerous. Rick cannot forgive himself because forgiveness would require him to open these vaults and admit why they exist in the first place. The memories he hides are not tidy. They are fractured, blurred, scattered across timelines, twisted by grief and rewritten by pain. Some are memories that happened. Some are memories he created to cope. Some are memories he erased. Some are memories he can no longer tell apart from fantasy. Rick's mind is both brilliant and broken, capable of building worlds, but incapable of trusting its own emotional history. What he remembers is shaped not by fact, but by guilt. And guilt reshapes memory until it becomes a weapon. Rick buries these memories because they challenge the identity he built after losing everything. He created a persona of indifference to protect himself from the agony of caring. He embraces logic to avoid feeling. He uses arrogance to block vulnerability. Remembering the past would tear holes through that identity, leaving him exposed. Rick believes he cannot afford to be exposed again. He believes pain will consume him if he allows it to resurface. So instead, he hides the memories behind layers of intellectual complexity, hoping the world will be too distracted by his brilliance to notice the grief pulsing beneath it. One of the memories Rick buries most deeply is the memory of the life he had before he became the Rick the multiverse knows now. Whatever version of Diane and Beth he once knew, whatever home he once lived in, whatever future he once imagined, it was lost in a moment that reshaped him permanently. Whether that loss happened by accident, violence, or the collapse of a relationship, the emotional truth remains the same. Rick once loved deeply. He once belonged somewhere. He once had a life that felt stable. Losing that life left a wound too large for him to process. The memory of that loss became the center of his emotional universe, even as he pretended it no longer mattered. Rick buries memories of who he used to be because they make him question the person he is now. He was not always detached. He was not always angry. He was not always cynical. There was a time when he believed in connection. There was a time when he allowed himself to feel hope. There was a time when he imagined a future shaped by love instead of resignation. Remembering that person hurts because it reveals how far he has fallen. Rick sees that past version of himself as someone who failed to protect the people he cared about, someone who could not keep his family safe, someone who made mistakes that led to unbearable consequences. Remembering that person is unbearable because Rick believes that version of himself deserved to suffer for his failures. Rick also buries memories of the countless worlds he has visited and abandoned. He has seen universes rise, universes fall, civilizations collapse, families break apart, and lives end in ways that haunt him. Many of these events were his fault. Some were accidents. Some were experiments gone wrong. Some were choices made out of desperation. Each memory carries a weight he cannot bear to acknowledge. If he allowed himself to remember every life affected by his actions, he would crumble under the magnitude of it. Rick tells himself that the multiverse is infinite, and therefore nothing matters. But this belief is a shield against the truth he refuses to look at. The truth that his actions have consequences he cannot escape emotionally. Rick buries memories of friendships he destroyed, people who cared about him, people he pushed away, people he betrayed, people he outgrew emotionally because their kindness made him uncomfortable. Remembering these connections reminds him that he is capable of love, and being capable of love means being capable of losing it. Rick avoids these memories because they expose the pattern he cannot break. He loves, then he runs. He connects, then he isolates. He gives, then he withdraws. These patterns are tied to memories of past pain, and Rick would rather erase them than confront them. Rick also buries memories of moments when he was genuinely happy. These memories are the most dangerous because they awaken longing. If he allows himself to remember moments of joy, he will desire them again. Desire leads to vulnerability, and vulnerability leads to pain. Rick prefers numbness to longing because numbness feels safer. Joy threatens numbness. So he avoids these memories, even though they are the ones he needs most. He stifles the warmth they hold, because warmth threatens the cold armor he relies on. But no matter how deeply Rick buries these memories, they leak into his life. They appear in dreams he denies having. They surface when he sees Beth smile in a way that reminds him of her mother. They appear when Morty looks at him with trust he did not earn. They surface in the way he hesitates before leaving. They surface in the way he closes his eyes when he hears someone say they care. These memories never stay buried. They rise like ghosts, gently reminding him of the person he was and the love he lost. Rick responds to these ghosts by running faster. He takes Morty on more dangerous adventures. He builds more complex inventions. He drinks more intensely. He distracts himself with chaos. But the memories follow him. The multiverse is infinite, but his guilt is portable. No matter how far he travels, it sits in his chest like a weight he cannot distribute elsewhere. Rick buries memories of the ways he hurt Beth when she was a child, whether he left her intentionally, accidentally, or through emotional absence. He remembers the tears she cried. He remembers the confusion in her eyes. He remembers the moments he chose something else over her. These memories hurt because they contradict the image of himself as someone beyond emotional responsibility. They force him to see how deeply his actions influenced her. Rick hides these memories because they show him that he is not just a man shaped by pain. He is a man who caused it. Rick also buries memories of moments when he revealed too much, moments when he cried, moments when he apologized, moments when he told someone he loved them, moments when he allowed himself to be weak. He despises these memories because they reveal cracks in the persona he relies on, but he cherishes them quietly because they remind him that he is still capable of feeling. These memories terrify him because they prove he is not beyond humanity. He is still vulnerable. Rick cannot forgive himself because he believes the memories he hides prove he is beyond redemption. In his mind, the past is a series of mistakes he cannot fix and losses he deserved. He carries these memories like chains and refuses to unlock them because unlocking them would mean re-evaluating his entire identity. Rick is terrified that if he faced the past honestly, he would see someone who failed to protect his family, someone who hurt the people he loved, someone who let grief reshape him into a man he never wanted to become. Despite how deeply he buries these memories, they still guide him. They influence the way he treats Morty. They influence the way he tries to protect Beth without admitting it. They influence the way he hesitates before hurting Jerry more than usual. They influence the way he keeps Summer at a safe distance. They influence the way he pretends not to care while secretly caring too much. The memories Rick hides shape his choices far more than the memories he acknowledges. One day, Rick may unbury these memories, not all at once, but slowly, piece by piece, when someone holds him during a moment of weakness, when someone forgives him even though he does not ask, when someone reminds him that he is still capable of being loved, when he realizes that remembering the pain does not mean drowning in it. Remembering can also mean healing, but healing requires forgiveness, and forgiveness requires acceptance. Rick is not ready for that yet. Until then, he keeps the memories buried. He guards them carefully. He pretends they do not shape him, but they do. They always have. And until he confronts them, he will continue living in the shadow of the life he lost, unable to forgive himself because he refuses to look at the truth that forgiveness begins with remembering. Rick Sanchez lives in a world of infinite possibilities, boundless realities, and countless versions of himself scattered across dimensions. Yet despite all that freedom, all that power, and all that terrifying intelligence, he has crafted a life that feels like a sentence. Not a sentence imposed by anyone else, but one imposed by his own mind. Rick punishes himself constantly. He does it quietly, cleverly, and consistently, disguised beneath layers of humor, arrogance, and distraction. This self-punishment is not random. It is his way of surviving guilt that never softened. Rick believes he deserves to suffer for the pain he caused, for the family he lost, and for the person he became. Over time, this belief hardened into a lifestyle. Rick punishes himself through loneliness. He isolates himself by making sure he is too difficult, too chaotic, too unpredictable, or too emotionally unavailable for anyone to remain close. He pushes people away not simply to keep them safe, but because he thinks he does not deserve their presence in the first place. If someone tries to care about him, he feels uncomfortable. If someone tries to understand him, he feels exposed. If someone tries to forgive him, he feels unworthy. So he builds walls out of sarcasm. He fortifies them with insults. He decorates them with inventions and destructive habits. Rick would rather be alone with his pain than confront the possibility that someone might love him despite it. Rick punishes himself through danger. He throws himself into crises no ordinary being could survive. He risks his life daily, not because he is fearless, but because he is angry at himself. He accepts danger as something he deserves, as a way to remind himself that his existence has consequences. Each time he survives something impossible, he feels nothing close to triumph. Instead, he feels frustrated that he continues to exist. He punishes himself by testing the limits of his mortality again and again, hoping the universe will eventually answer the question he refuses to say aloud. Am I allowed to stop? But every time he survives, the cycle continues. Rick punishes himself through addiction. The drinking is not simply a habit. It is a way of numbing the thoughts that grow too sharp when he is sober. Alcohol softens the memories he refuses to face. It blurs the corners of grief that cut him too deeply. It quiets the voice in his mind that tells him he failed the people he loved. Rick drinks because sobriety forces him to feel. He punishes himself by staying intoxicated enough to forget who he could have been, but not so intoxicated that he loses control of the persona he built. It is a delicate balance, one that hurts him physically and emotionally, but one he maintains because he believes he deserves the pain. Rick punishes himself through exhaustion. He never stops building, inventing, traveling, or thinking. His mind races faster than the world can follow. He never rests, because rest leads to reflection. Reflection leads to regret. Regret leads to the emotional mirror he cannot face. So he exhausts himself to a point where he collapses into sleep without thinking. He punishes himself by depriving his mind of peace. He gives himself no time to heal because healing is something he believes he has not earned. Rick punishes himself through emotional control. He keeps his feelings hidden even when they scream inside him. He speaks in sarcasm when he wants to speak in sincerity. He uses humor to deflect moments of connection. He mocks affection when he longs for it. He avoids apologies when he feels them deeply. Rick punishes himself by denying himself the emotional freedom he gives others. He believes that expressing emotion makes him vulnerable, and vulnerability opens him to the same pain that destroyed his earlier life. So he stays silent, even when silence hurts him. Rick punishes himself through sabotage. Whenever he experiences something close to happiness, he destroys it. When he begins to bond with Morty, he creates distance. When Beth shows him trust, he withdraws. When Summer understands him, he diverts attention. When Jerry surprises him with kindness, he recoils. Happiness feels dangerous to Rick. It feels like a reminder of what he once had and lost. So he punishes himself by ending joy before it can end on its own. This prevents him from experiencing abandonment again, but it also prevents him from experiencing love. Rick punishes himself through comparison. He sees other versions of himself who made different choices, and he uses them as evidence of his own failure. He sees Ricks who kept their families safe, Ricks who found peace, Ricks who changed, Ricks who learned tenderness. These versions of himself torment him because they prove possibility. They prove he did not have to become who he is now. Rick punishes himself by imagining the life he could have had and blaming himself for destroying it. Rick punishes himself through loyalty to pain. He keeps memories that hurt him because they make him feel grounded. Pain is familiar. Pain is predictable. Pain cannot surprise him. Rick clings to pain as if it were a companion because it gives him something he believes he deserves. He punishes himself by refusing to release it. He punishes himself by believing that letting go would betray the people he lost. Rick punishes himself through brilliance. His intellect is both his shield and his weapon. He uses it to justify isolation. He uses it to push others away. He uses it to escape consequences. But he also uses it to destroy opportunities for healing. Rick tells himself he is too smart for emotional growth, too aware for hope, too logical for love. This belief punishes him because it traps him inside a version of himself that was born from trauma, not truth. Rick punishes himself through contradictions. He wants connection, but isolates himself. He wants forgiveness, but rejects compassion. He wants love, but pushes it away. These contradictions create tension that never resolves. Rick lives within this tension because he believes suffering is the correct consequence of his past. He punishes himself by repeating patterns he knows cause him harm. He punishes himself by believing he is incapable of change. Rick punishes himself through expectations. He holds himself to impossible standards. He expects himself to be invincible, infallible, untouchable. Whenever he fails to meet these expectations, which happens constantly because they are unrealistic, he feels shame. He punishes himself with criticism harsher than anything anyone else could inflict. His internal voice is unforgiving. It tells him he is weak if he seeks comfort. It tells him he is foolish if he lets someone in. It tells him he is worthless if he fails even once. Rick punishes himself by listening to this voice more closely than any other. Rick punishes himself through avoidance. He avoids therapy. He avoids emotional conversations. He avoids vulnerability. He avoids anything that might bring him closer to healing. Avoidance is his way of preserving the pain he believes he must carry. He fears that healing would change him into someone he does not recognize, someone who might need people, someone who might feel hope, someone who might be hurt again. Rick punishes himself by choosing pain over possibility. Rick punishes himself through identity. He identifies as someone beyond redemption, someone who cannot be loved, someone who does not deserve forgiveness. This identity protects him from disappointment, but it also traps him in misery. He punishes himself by believing that the only version of Rick worth being is the one who suffers. He holds on to this belief because it justifies the choices he made after losing his family. Rick punishes himself by refusing to imagine a life where he is allowed to heal. Rick punishes himself through silence. He does not tell anyone the full truth of what he feels. He hides the guilt that shapes him. He hides the grief that weighs him down. He hides the longing that breaks him. By staying silent, he ensures that no one can help him. This silence punishes him because it isolates him further and deepens the wound he refuses to treat. Despite all this, Rick's self-punishment reveals something important. He cares. He cares deeply. If he truly believed nothing mattered, he would not punish himself so severely. His suffering proves that he longs for redemption even if he believes he cannot have it. It proves he loves his family even if he cannot say it. It proves he feels guilt even when he acts indifferent. His pain is not proof of nihilism. It is proof of humanity. Rick punishes himself because it feels easier than healing. Healing requires forgiveness. Forgiveness requires vulnerability. Vulnerability requires honesty. Honesty requires facing the grief he buried. Rick is not ready for that. So he clings to punishment because it feels safer. It feels familiar. It feels like something he deserves. One day, Rick may grow tired of punishing himself. He may realize that suffering does not bring him closer to redemption. He may discover that forgiving himself does not erase his past, but allows him to build a different future. He may learn that love is not something he must punish himself for wanting. But until that day comes, Rick will continue living inside a life built from self-inflicted wounds, believing that pain is the only thing he has earned. Rick Sanchez does not fear monsters, universes, gods, or the impossible. He has confronted the most terrifying things the multiverse can throw at him and walked away with a joke on his lips and a blood-stained lab coat that he barely notices anymore. But love is different. Love is the one force in existence that Rick will do almost anything to avoid. It is not because he does not want it. It is because he cannot bear the idea of losing it again. Rick once loved deeply, and the loss of that love carved a wound so severe that he built an entire personality around never letting anyone get close enough to hurt him like that again. The fear that sits inside him is not fear of love itself, but fear of what happens when love disappears. Rick's history is shaped by fragments of truth and layers of emotional distortion, but the one constant across timelines is that he lost something that mattered. It does not matter if the details change across realities. Rick's grief remains consistent. Whether he lost a partner, a family, or a version of himself he can never reclaim, the emotional truth is the same. Rick once had love, and then it was gone. That loss shaped him far more than any scientific discovery. It reshaped his worldview, his identity, and his understanding of what connection means. Rick fears love because love makes him vulnerable. When he loves someone, he is no longer in control. He cannot predict their actions, their choices, or their fate. He cannot program them into stability. He cannot invent a device that prevents emotional pain. Love introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is the one variable Rick cannot calculate. In the world of science, Rick is invincible. In the world of emotions, he is terrified. Love exposes the most fragile part of him, the part he keeps hidden even from himself, the part that still aches. Rick also fears love because it reminds him of who he was before he lost everything. He remembers being someone capable of tenderness. He remembers laughing without bitterness. He remembers feeling joy without suspicion. He remembers believing in connection without expecting betrayal. These memories are painful because they show him that he was once softer, more open, more willing to trust. Losing the love he once had shattered that version of him. Every time he feels affection now, he briefly becomes that earlier version of himself. And then, the fear hits. The fear that becoming that person again will only lead to another heartbreak he cannot survive. Rick fears love because it contradicts the identity he built to protect himself. He crafted a persona that rejects emotional attachment, a persona that mocks sentiment, a persona that acts as though nothing matters, a persona that feigns superiority to avoid vulnerability. When someone loves him, or when he begins to love them, that persona cracks. The truth beneath it starts showing. Rick hates that truth because it reveals how deeply he wants connection and wanting. Connection feels like weakness. He fears becoming someone who relies on others. He fears becoming someone who needs comfort. He fears becoming someone who hopes. Hope is dangerous for a man who has been broken by loss. Rick also fears love because he cannot forgive himself for the ways he believes he failed the people he once cared about. Loving others forces him to remember the responsibilities he did not uphold, the promises he broke, the lives he believes he destroyed. He pushes people away now because he is terrified of repeating his mistakes. If he hurts someone who loves him, it confirms his worst belief about himself. If he loses someone who loves him, it reopens the wound he has spent decades trying to bury. Loving others means confronting the possibility of hurting them or being hurt by them, and Rick fears both outcomes. Rick fears love because it lingers. When he loses someone physically, emotionally, or through conflict, their memory stays with him. He does not forget people easily. He pretends he does. He tells himself they were insignificant. But the truth is that he carries every connection inside him like a scar. When he loses someone he loves, it changes him permanently. He becomes colder, angrier, and more withdrawn. He fears this transformation because it has happened before. He knows what it feels like to lose himself to grief, and he is afraid that another loss will break him entirely. Rick fears love because it creates dependence. When he lets someone into his life, even in small ways, he begins to depend on them emotionally. He depends on Morty's loyalty. He depends on Beth's desire to keep him in the family. He depends on Summer's resilience. He depends on the grounding feeling of having people around him. Rick hates that dependence because it makes him vulnerable to abandonment. He built his life around the idea that he needs no one. Love threatens that structure. It forces him to rely on others, and reliance terrifies him. Rick fears love because it softens him. When he loves someone, he becomes protective, cautious, careful. He pauses before making dangerous decisions. He hesitates before leaving. He considers their feelings before acting recklessly. These moments of softness frighten him because they show him a side of himself he tried to kill long ago, a side that wants connection more than superiority, a side that yearns for affection, a side that cares. Rick fears this softness because he believes it will be used against him. He believes it will lead to pain. Softness feels like an echo of the past he buried, and he wants to keep that past locked away. Rick fears love most profoundly with Morty. Morty is the one person who consistently reaches him, who pulls him toward humanity. Morty gives Rick a reason to stay, a reason to try, a reason to protect instead of destroy. Loving Morty terrifies Rick because Morty is fragile in ways Rick cannot control. The thought of losing Morty, emotionally or physically, shakes Rick to his core. He pretends to be annoyed by Morty's presence, but he depends on it. Morty gives him something he does not want to admit he needs: stability, companionship, a sense of being wanted. Rick fears losing Morty so much that he sometimes pushes him away preemptively, hoping distance will protect him from heartbreak. But that distance creates its own fear, the fear of losing him anyway. Rick also fears love with Beth. The complicated bond between father and daughter forces Rick to confront every failure from his past. He wants to love her fully, but he fears doing so will expose how much guilt he carries. Loving Beth means acknowledging the years he was absent, the mistakes he made, and the emotional damage she developed, partly because of him. Rick fears that loving Beth openly will force him to face the truth that he failed her in ways he cannot repair. He keeps her at a distance not because he does not care, but because caring feels like an admission of guilt he is terrified to express. Rick fears love because love expects something from him. Love expects honesty. Love expects presence. Love expects effort. Love expects vulnerability. Rick fears he cannot provide these things consistently. He fears that loving someone sets him up to disappoint them. He fears that love requires growth he does not know how to achieve. He fears that love requires letting go of the cynicism he uses to avoid pain. Rick is terrified of failing others, so he avoids situations where failure seems inevitable. Rick fears love because it changes him. When he lets someone in, he becomes less reckless. He becomes less destructive. He becomes less numb. These changes threaten the emotional defenses he has built. They remind him that he is still capable of being human. Rick fears this humanity because it contradicts the identity he clings to, but it also terrifies him because he knows humanity means vulnerability, and vulnerability leads to pain. Yet despite all these fears, Rick continues to love. He tries not to. He hides it. He denies it. But he cares deeply. His love is messy and impulsive. It is buried beneath sarcasm and avoidance. It is tangled with guilt and anger. But it exists. Rick fears love, but he cannot extinguish it. The same pain that made him afraid of love also made him capable of loving fiercely, even if he expresses it in ways that seem destructive. The tragedy of Rick Sanchez is that he equates love with loss. He cannot separate the two. Every time he feels himself caring, he imagines the moment that care will shatter. So he hurts himself first. He leaves people before they can leave him. He distances himself before he becomes essential. He mocks affection before it can soften him. He destroys potential before potential becomes dependence. Rick creates grief before grief can be forced upon him. One day, Rick may stop fearing love long enough to let it stay. He may realize that losing love once does not mean losing it forever. He may see that connection can coexist with pain. He may discover that vulnerability is not failure. He may understand that love does not always end in destruction. But for now, Rick lives with his fear. He hides it beneath adventure and arrogance. He buries it beneath drinking and distraction, but it follows him everywhere, shaping every relationship, every choice, and every moment of tenderness he tries to suppress. And until Rick faces this fear, he will continue to believe that loving someone means risking destruction. He will continue to run from the one thing he wants most. He will continue to deny himself forgiveness because forgiveness requires believing he is worthy of love, and Rick is not ready to believe that truth yet. Rick Sanchez walks through life with a smirk on his face, a joke ready to fire, and a tone that suggests nothing can touch him. To most people watching, he seems invincible, too smart to be threatened, too detached to care, too hardened to feel. But beneath every joke Rick makes, beneath every sarcastic remark and every mocking laugh, there is a quiet collapse happening inside him. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. It does not look like despair in the traditional sense. It is subtle, persistent, and constant. It is a collapse caused by years of burying pain, refusing vulnerability, denying humanity, and living with guilt that never healed correctly. Rick hides this collapse because showing it would expose everything he fears most, and because he believes that the world, or worse, his family, cannot handle the truth of what he feels. The collapse began long before Rick became the man the multiverse knows. It began the moment he realized that genius does not protect you from losing people, that intelligence does not shield you from grief, that being the smartest man in countless realities does not prevent your heart from breaking. Rick learned early on that pain can coexist with brilliance, and that realization shaped him in a way he cannot undo. Every time he lost someone, every time he failed someone, every time he tried but came up short, the collapse inside him grew a little larger. Rick covers that collapse with jokes, because humor is the only emotional tool he trusts. Jokes protect him from sincerity. Jokes redirect conversations away from vulnerability. Jokes turn moments of emotional honesty into moments of deflection. Rick uses humor the way others use shields. Every sarcastic comment is a barrier. Every insult is a diversion. Every laugh is a bandage. Humor keeps him from revealing that the collapse inside him is still happening, slowly and relentlessly. Rick hides this collapse because acknowledging it would force him to confront emotions he has avoided for years. He would have to accept the grief of a life he lost. He would have to accept the guilt of decisions he made. He would have to accept the loneliness he created. These truths terrify him. So he tells jokes to drown out the feelings that threaten to surface. When conversation gets emotional, he interrupts with sarcasm. When someone reaches out to comfort him, he turns it into comedy. When he feels himself breaking internally, he laughs so no one else hears the sound. The collapse shows itself subtly in his behavior. In the way he drinks, not because he enjoys it, but because the alcohol numbs the thoughts that overwhelm him. In the way he pushes Morty away after letting him get too close. In the way he watches Beth from a distance, wanting connection but fearing the responsibility that comes with it. In the way he pauses before leaving the house, as if trying to remember what home used to feel like. In the way he stares into space for a moment too long before masking the look with a smirk. These micro-expressions are traces of the collapse he pretends does not exist. Rick hides the collapse because he fears people would pity him if they knew. He despises the idea of being pitied. He spent his entire life building a persona of strength, intelligence, and dominance. He cannot allow anyone to see weakness beneath it. Pity would force him to accept that he is human, that he is breakable, that he is hurting. Rick cannot tolerate that reflection. He would rather be feared than pitied. He would rather be seen as heartless than as someone whose heart is in pieces. The collapse inside Rick is also shaped by his relationship with mortality. He has faced death countless times. He has watched versions of himself die. He has abandoned bodies, realities, and identities. But each encounter with mortality chips away at him emotionally. He does not fear death. He fears living with the consequences of his choices. The collapse grows every time he survives something he believes should have ended him. Survival feels like punishment because he believes he deserves suffering for the mistakes he made. Humor becomes a way to soften the blow of realizing he is still alive when part of him does not want to be. Rick hides the collapse because revealing it would require him to accept help. He does not trust help. He does not trust emotional support. He does not trust the idea that someone could care enough to hold his pain without judging him. Rick has been alone for so long that he believes he must carry everything alone. When someone offers him support, he jokes to signal that he does not need it. But the truth is that he needs it desperately. He collapses in silence because he believes no one can help him, and because he does not know how to allow himself to be helped. The collapse grows strongest during moments of tenderness. When Morty shows him genuine affection, the collapse trembles. When Beth expresses disappointment in him, the collapse expands. When Summer stands up to him, the collapse flares with guilt. When Jerry surprises him with patience, the collapse shifts, confused by the softness directed toward him. Tenderness exposes cracks in the armor he built. Every gentle moment reminds Rick that he is still capable of feeling deeply, and feeling deeply threatens the numbness that keeps the collapse from consuming him. Rick hides the collapse because he believes that showing it would burden others. He does not want Morty to see the truth. He does not want Beth to feel responsible for his pain. He does not want Summer to be affected by the weight he carries. He does not want Jerry to feel obligated to help him. Rick pushes the collapse down because he believes protecting others from his pain is part of atonement. He punishes himself by carrying everything internally, convinced that silence is the price he must pay for failing the people he once loved. The collapse is also shaped by the way Rick compares himself to other versions of himself. He sees Ricks who made better choices, Ricks who held on to their families, Ricks who found peace, Ricks who became softer instead of harder. These comparisons amplify the collapse because they show Rick that healing is possible, but he believes he cannot have it. He sees his multiversal counterparts as proof that he is the version who failed. The collapse feeds on this belief, reminding him constantly that he is not the best version of himself, but the broken one. Rick uses humor to hide the collapse because humor gives him a sense of control. When he makes others laugh or feel uncomfortable or confused, he controls the emotional environment. He does not have to respond to feelings he does not understand. He does not have to address guilt he cannot process. He does not have to answer questions he has spent decades avoiding. Jokes are the walls he builds, so he does not fall apart in plain sight. Rick hides the collapse because acknowledging it would force him to admit he still wants connection. He wants Morty to trust him. He wants Beth to forgive him. He wants Summer to see him as something more than a chaotic force. He wants a family he can belong to. He wants stability, even though he runs from it. Rick wants all these things, but wanting them scares him because it opens the possibility of losing them. The collapse inside him is stronger when he feels this longing. It tightens around his heart, reminding him that desire is dangerous. The collapse also fuels Rick's pattern of pushing people away. Every time he gets close to someone, he feels the collapse tremble. He panics. He makes a joke. He creates distance. He starts an argument. He leaves. He destroys the moment before it can become meaningful enough to hurt him later. Rick fears emotional closeness because it threatens the illusion of control he uses to manage the collapse. Staying distant feels safer, even if it intensifies his loneliness. Rick hides the collapse beneath humor because laughter is easier than crying. Sarcasm is easier than honesty. Mockery is easier than sincerity. Comedy is easier than grief. If Rick allowed himself to cry, he fears he would never stop. If he allowed himself to feel everything he has suppressed, he fears the collapse would break him entirely. So he jokes instead. He uses laughter as a mask, a weapon, a defense mechanism. It keeps people from asking the questions he cannot answer. It keeps him from revealing the truth he cannot speak. Yet, the collapse inside Rick is not total. There are moments when it softens, when Morty hugs him sincerely, when Beth tells him she wants him in her life, when Summer refuses to give up on him, when Jerry shows him compassion. These moments do not erase the collapse, but they delay it. They quiet it. They remind him that he is not as alone as he feels. Sometimes these moments frighten him, but sometimes they give him a small, fleeting sense of peace. Rick's internal collapse is not a sign that he is broken beyond repair. It is a sign that he is still human, that he still feels, that he still cares. The collapse persists because he has never allowed himself to heal. He has never given himself permission to rest. He has never believed he deserves softness. If Rick could learn to see himself through the eyes of the people who love him, even briefly, he might begin to slow the collapse. He might begin to accept help. He might begin to forgive himself. But for now, Rick hides the collapse. He wears his jokes like armor. He lets humor carry the weight of his pain. He laughs so no one hears the sound of his heart breaking slowly. He mocks so no one sees the vulnerability behind his eyes. He speaks loudly so no one notices the silence inside him. Rick is collapsing quietly, but he believes this collapse is his burden to carry alone. And until he learns to trust the people who love him, the collapse will continue, hidden beneath every joke he makes. Rick Sanchez lives in a universe where power is everything. Invention shapes reality. Intelligence rewrites boundaries. Knowledge bends entire civilizations to a single will. But for Rick, power is not only a tool, it is a shield. It is his way of controlling a world that once took everything from him. Control gives him the illusion of safety, the illusion that nothing can hurt him again if he remains powerful enough, smart enough, or detached enough. to avoid emotional destruction. But Rick mistakes this control for safety, and this mistake shapes his entire life. Beneath every act of dominance, every calculated decision, and every moment of intellectual superiority lies a deep fear that he refuses to acknowledge, the fear that power failed him once and could fail him again. To understand why Rick mistakes control for safety, you have to understand the moment he realized he could not protect the people he loved. At some point in his life, Rick faced a loss so devastating that it fractured his relationship with the universe itself. Whether it was the loss of a partner, the loss of a family, or the collapse of a world he trusted, that moment became the core of his emotional identity. Rick once believed that knowledge gave him the ability to protect what mattered, but when knowledge failed and the world still broke, Rick made a decision that would define him forever. If he could not protect the people he loved, he would protect himself by eliminating the possibility of vulnerability. This is where Rick's obsession with control began. It was not born from arrogance, but from fear. Control offered him structure, it offered him logic, it offered him something predictable in a universe full of chaos. When Rick exerts control over a situation, he feels momentarily safe. When he controls the emotional distance between himself and others, he feels insulated from loss. When he controls Morty's trajectory, Beth's expectations, Summer's involvement, or Jerry's presence, he believes he is preventing the emotional disaster he experienced in the past. But in reality, control traps him in a cycle of fear that never resolves. Rick seeks control in every aspect of life. He controls physical danger with technology. He controls outcomes with manipulation. He controls his environment with inventions that eliminate unpredictability. He controls his emotions with sarcasm and alcohol. He controls the behavior of others by positioning himself as the smartest person alive, forcing them to rely on him even when they resent it. He does all of this because losing control reminds him of the moment when he failed to protect what mattered most. Rick also mistakes control for safety in his relationships. With Morty, Rick keeps the dynamic uneven. He positions himself as the mentor, the leader, the one who decides where they go and what they do. He does this partly out of habit, but also because he fears giving Morty too much agency. Agency means unpredictability, and unpredictability means vulnerability. Rick fears that if Morty ever sees how emotionally dependent he truly is on him, Morty might leave. So he hides this dependence behind control. With Beth, Rick uses control differently. He distances himself so she cannot demand emotional consistency. He reappears in her life unpredictably so she never has time to build expectations. He keeps conversations safely shallow or aggressively intellectual so they never reach the emotional depths that make him uncomfortable. Rick fears that if Beth ever sees him entirely, she will realize he is not the father she idealized. Control protects him from being truly known. With Summer, Rick uses control to avoid responsibility. Her intelligence and independence make her capable of challenging him. This scares Rick more than he admits. Summer sees through his games more easily than the others. She is willing to confront him. She is willing to call out his contradictions. Because of this, Rick controls the proximity he allows. He lets her in when it benefits him, then distances himself when her insight gets too close. Control keeps her from seeing the man beneath the persona. With Jerry, control manifests as superiority. Rick keeps Jerry beneath him. He belittles him. He mocks him. He treats him as insignificant. This behavior disguises Rick's fear of becoming emotionally equal. If Rick respects Jerry, if he acknowledges Jerry's emotional wisdom, if he sees Jerry as a real threat to the emotional dynamic of the family, Rick loses the illusion of dominance. Control allows him to maintain the belief that he is above emotion, even when Jerry's steady kindness threatens that illusion. Rick mistakes control for safety because the alternative, emotional openness, feels too dangerous. When he opens himself even slightly, the collapse inside him becomes louder. He fears that people will see the guilt he carries. He fears they will understand how deeply he blames himself for the suffering he caused. He fears they will abandon him once they see the truth. Control hiding the vulnerability keeps these fears from becoming reality, but it also keeps him from experiencing the love he desperately wants. Rick's reliance on control is also shaped by the fact that he sees the universe in its rawest form. He understands its fragility. He sees its chaos. He sees how easily life can break. Most people are protected by ignorance, but Rick sees every threat, every possibility, and every hidden danger. This awareness overwhelms him emotionally, so he relies on control to combat the anxiety the universe naturally produces. If he can control enough variables, he believes he can prevent another tragedy. But this belief is a lie. Control does not guarantee safety. It only creates the illusion of it. Rick's control extends to his identity. He presents himself as the smartest man alive because intelligence makes him untouchable. If he is untouchable, he cannot be hurt. If he cannot be hurt, he cannot lose. Rick clings to this identity because he fears the alternative. If he is not defined by intelligence, he is defined by emotion, and emotion is the realm where he feels weakest. Control over perception gives him distance from his own vulnerability, but the cost of mistaking control for safety is immense. Rick loses intimacy, he loses trust, he loses the chance for healing, he loses the possibility of genuine connection. He pushes away people who love him because control feels safer than closeness. He sabotages moments of tenderness because vulnerability threatens him. He damages relationships because unpredictability scares him more than loneliness. Rick does not realize that safety comes from connection, not control. Safety comes from trust, not dominance. Safety comes from love, not distance. Rick's need for control also creates instability. Because he tries to control everything, he becomes overwhelmed by the endless variables he cannot predict. This pushes him further into exhaustion and addiction. He drinks because control cannot silence guilt. He isolates because control cannot prevent loneliness. He argues because control cannot stop emotional truth from surfacing. Rick is trapped in a cycle where control gives him temporary relief, but increases his suffering long term. Rick also uses control to punish himself. If he maintains strict control over his emotions, he prevents himself from feeling the comfort he believes he does not deserve. If he controls his relationships, he prevents himself from becoming important to others, which feels safer than risking heartbreak. If he controls the narrative of who he is, he prevents others from discovering the contradictions inside him. Control becomes a form of self-inflicted discipline, the consequence of believing he caused deep emotional harm. The tragedy of Rick mistaking control for safety is that he overlooks the moments where he is genuinely safe, the moments when Morty forgives him despite everything, the moments when Beth reaches out with compassion, the moments when Summer tries to understand him, the moments when Jerry offers unexpected patience. These moments are where real safety lives. But Rick sees them as threats. He sees them as moments that could lead to emotional exposure. He sees them as openings he must close quickly. He chooses control out of fear, even when love extends a hand toward healing. If Rick learned to release some control, even briefly, he might discover that safety does not come from power. It comes from connection. It comes from allowing himself to be seen. It comes from recognizing that vulnerability is not the same as weakness. It comes from understanding that love does not always end in loss. But until he is brave enough to face that truth, Rick will continue to misinterpret control as protection. One day, Rick might realize that the world did not break because he lacked power. The world broke because he believed he had to carry everything alone. He might learn that real safety lies in letting people help carry the weight. He might understand that control cannot prevent pain, but connection can help heal it. But for now, Rick clings to control because it is the only thing that makes him feel steady. It is his answer to a universe that once destroyed him, and until he learns to trust something other than power, he will continue to mistake control for safety, even as it quietly destroys him. Rick Sanchez has spent most of his life in motion, endless motion, violent motion, chaotic motion. He does not move because he enjoys adventure as much as he claims. He does not travel through dimensions because he is searching for excitement. He does not race across realities because he finds purpose in discovery. Rick moves because movement protects him from the one thing he fears more than any cosmic threat: stillness, peace, quiet, the absence of distraction. For Rick, peace is not comfort. Peace is exposure. Peace forces him into the one environment he cannot control, shape, or escape. Peace forces him to feel. The truth is that Rick has never known how to exist in stillness. When he was younger, stillness meant facing memories he did not want to confront, memories that carried grief, abandonment, loneliness, and the sharp echoes of the life he once had but lost. Movement helped him escape those echoes. As long as he kept moving, as long as he kept thinking, inventing, drinking, or fighting, he could outrun the ghosts that waited for him in the quiet. Stillness gave those ghosts room to speak, and Rick could not tolerate their voices. Over time, running from peace became a habit, then a pattern, then a way of life. Rick filled every second of his existence with noise. He filled the silence with sarcasm, the empty spaces with conflict, and the quiet with the chaos of adventure. Peace became unfamiliar to him, like a language he once knew but forgot. Whenever life offered him a moment of calm, he recoiled. Calm felt threatening. Calm reminded him of the night everything fell apart. Calm forced him to acknowledge that intelligence cannot protect you from heartbreak. Calm forced him to hear the thoughts he drowned in alcohol and invention. Rick runs from peace because peace shows him the truth. He hides behind arrogance, the truth that he is tired, not just physically tired, but emotionally exhausted in a way that feels permanent. Peace reveals how exhausted he is. It reveals the weight he carries in his chest. It reveals the sorrow that sits beneath his jokes. It reveals the longing that lingers beneath his avoidance. Peace brings his internal collapse to the surface, and Rick cannot handle that exposure. He also runs from peace because peace creates space for regret. When Rick sits still, even for a few moments, regret crawls toward him with memories of things he cannot fix. Regret shows him faces he cannot bring back. Regret reveals the consequences of decisions he pretends were harmless. Peace forces Rick to see the trails of emotional ruin he left behind in pursuit of numbness. Peace makes him remember versions of himself he despises. In chaos, he can ignore regret. In peace, regret becomes loud. Rick also avoids peace because peace requires vulnerability. If he slows down, he risks being present emotionally. He risks letting someone close. He risks seeing how much he cares. He risks acknowledging how deeply Morty matters to him. He risks seeing how much Beth still longs for connection with him. He risks realizing that Summer understands parts of him he thought were hidden. He risks accepting Jerry's patience as genuine. Peace breaks his emotional armor because it asks him to observe instead of escape. Observing his own heart terrifies him. Running from peace also allows Rick to maintain control. When he is constantly in motion, constantly creating or manipulating or joking or traveling, he controls the narrative. He chooses the pace. He chooses the environment. He chooses the emotional distance. Peace removes those choices. Peace forces him into a space where he cannot escape himself. And Rick fears being alone with himself more than he fears anything else in the multiverse. Rick also believes he does not deserve peace. Peace feels like a reward, and Rick believes he has earned nothing but punishment. His guilt convinces him that stillness is something reserved for better versions of himself, versions who did not fail, who did not run, who did not lose control, who did not destroy relationships, who did not break under the weight of grief. Rick views peace as something he forfeited long ago. So when peace approaches, he pushes it away before it can confuse him. He refuses to sit in comfort because comfort feels wrong, like a lie the universe is telling him. Rick's pattern of running from peace becomes clear when his family tries to give him gentle moments. When Morty tries to spend quiet time with him, Rick interrupts with jokes or new plans. When Beth invites him to share a meal without conflict, Rick finds a way to make the moment unstable. When Summer reaches out with sincerity, Rick changes the subject. When Jerry shows him kindness, Rick uses sarcasm to distance himself. Rick feels more comfortable in chaos because chaos matches the storm inside him. Peace feels foreign. Even when Rick is physically still, his mind is not. His thoughts race, looping through ideas, inventions, excuses, regrets, and defenses. Peace does not quiet his mind. Peace amplifies it. That amplification terrifies him because it overwhelms him with the emotions he buried for years. Rick fears what he might feel if he lets the noise fade. He fears that the grief will swallow him. He fears that the guilt will drown him. He fears that the longing will shatter him. Movement keeps those emotions small enough to manage. Stillness lets them grow into storms. Rick also runs from peace because he fears what others will see if he stops performing. His persona is built around the constant display of brilliance. If he is still, even briefly, people might see the cracks in that persona. They might see how deeply he aches. They might see how frightened he is. They might see how lonely he feels. Rick cannot let people see that truth, not because he does not want to be known, but because he fears pity. Pity is unbearable to him. Pity makes him feel weak. Pity reminds him that people see him as someone
in need of help. Rick cannot accept help because accepting help requires trust. Running from peace also keeps Rick from forming connections that could soften him. When life slows down, relationships have room to grow. Rick does not want relationships to grow because deeper connection means deeper vulnerability. He fears how much harder it will be to lose people again if he loves them more fully. Stillness invites intimacy. Rick avoids intimacy because intimacy makes people unforgettable. Losing unforgettable people nearly destroyed him the first time. Rick also avoids peace because peace reveals time. When he sits still, he becomes aware of how much time has passed. He becomes aware of the years he wasted running. He becomes aware of how old he feels. He becomes aware of how long he has lived without healing. Peace makes him feel the weight of every year that changed him, every year that hardened him, every year that kept him from softness. Rick cannot tolerate that awareness, so he keeps moving, pretending time does not touch him. Even when Rick experiences small moments of peace, something inside him panics. He feels the beginning of calm and immediately looks for something to break it. He starts unnecessary conflicts. He creates problems. He picks fights. He jumps into danger. He does this not because he wants chaos, but because chaos is familiar. Peace is unpredictable in ways chaos is not. Chaos may hurt him, but peace threatens to change him. Rick fears change because change requires letting go of the past he carries like an identity. But despite all his running, peace still finds him occasionally. It finds him in the quiet moments when Morty falls asleep beside him on an alien planet. It finds him when Beth hugs him unexpectedly. It finds him when Summer looks at him with understanding. It finds him when Jerry forgives him without argument. In these moments, Rick pauses. The stillness brushes against him like a soft reminder that peace is not a threat. Peace is healing. Peace is the doorway to connection he claims he does not want, but desperately needs. These moments frighten him because they feel good. They feel too good. They make him long for something he believes he is not allowed to have. Peace is dangerous because it reveals how deeply Rick still wants comfort, and wanting comfort makes him feel weak, childish, and exposed. So he runs again. Rick may not admit it, but running from peace drains him. It leaves him exhausted in ways he never talks about. It keeps him trapped in cycles of self-destruction. It keeps him emotionally distant from the people who love him. It keeps him repeating patterns that isolate him. The tragedy of Rick's running is that peace is the one thing that could actually help him heal, but he fears it too much to let it in. One day, Rick might stop long enough to let peace touch him fully. He might sit in silence without panicking. He might allow himself to feel without running. He might discover that
the collapse inside him softens when he rests. He might see that the world does not fall apart when he stops controlling everything. He might understand that peace is not the enemy. But until that day comes, Rick will continue to run, mistaking motion for safety and chaos for protection. Rick Sanchez carries a quiet suspicion toward happiness, almost like a scientist evaluating a dangerous pressure valve that is seconds away from bursting. Happiness to Rick is not comfort. Happiness is not safety. Happiness is not something to savor. Instead, it is a warning sign, a flashing red light, a reminder of every moment in his past when joy appeared only to vanish and leave devastation behind. Rick does not distrust happiness because he is naturally cynical. He distrusts it because every time he allowed himself to feel happiness deeply, it was taken from him. And his heart learned the lesson so thoroughly that it never forgot. The more Rick loved something, the harder the universe punished him for it. Now, when happiness approaches, he flinches. Rick's distrust of happiness began long before the circumstances of his adult life. Even in younger years, he had a complicated relationship with joy. Happiness always seemed fleeting. Whenever he formed a connection, it ended sooner than he expected. Whenever he believed in something, it collapsed under the weight of reality. Whenever he felt stability, chaos found him. Over time, Rick internalized the belief that happiness was not a gift, but a trap. Something designed to soften him before delivering a deeper blow. This belief shaped him emotionally in a way that still affects him now. Rick distrusts happiness because he once allowed himself to be truly happy, and that happiness ended in the most profound loss of his life. Whether it was losing his family, his partner, or a version of stability he never recovered from, the emotional truth is consistent across timelines. Rick loved deeply, and that love created happiness. When that happiness was taken, Rick broke. He shattered in a way that brilliance could not fix, and pain filled the spaces that love once occupied. From that day on, happiness became dangerous. Happiness became the force that destroyed him. Rick also distrusts happiness because happiness makes him feel fragile. When he is happy, he becomes aware of how much he cares. The more he cares, the more he fears losing what he cares about. Happiness exposes the softest parts of him, the parts he hides beneath sarcasm, arrogance, and calculated indifference. Rick has spent years pretending he is immune to emotion, but happiness threatens that illusion. Happiness reminds him that he still has a heart, and that heart still aches for things he believes he does not deserve. The vulnerability embedded in joy scares him. Rick distrusts happiness because it requires presence. To be happy, truly happy, he must be emotionally present in his life, in his relationships, in his family. But presence is difficult for Rick because presence brings awareness. Awareness of love, awareness of longing, awareness of guilt, awareness of how much he wants to be better but feels incapable of change. Happiness forces him to confront these truths. When he is happy, he feels the weight of the past, pressing against the possibility of a better future. That tension scares him more than chaos ever could. Rick also distrusts happiness because happiness slows him down. When he feels happy, even briefly, the constant motion that keeps him safe begins to fade. He becomes still, and stillness leads to reflection. Rick avoids reflection because reflection brings him face to face with the memories he buried. Memories of laughter he once shared with people who are gone. Memories of promises he made and broke. Memories of moments when he felt part of something meaningful. Happiness opens the door to those memories, and Rick quickly shuts it before they can overwhelm him. Rick distrusts happiness in relationships as well. When he feels joy with Morty, he becomes protective in ways that scare him. He fears that caring too much will make losing Morty unbearable. So when Morty brings him happiness, Rick often undermines the moment with sarcasm or conflict. It is not because he wants to hurt Morty. It is because he wants to protect himself. If the happiness ends, Rick wants to believe he was never invested. It is a lie he clings to because the truth is too painful. With Beth, Rick distrusts the happiness of reconciliation. Moments when Beth reaches for him emotionally frighten him. They make him aware of how much he failed her in the past and how much he still wants her acceptance. Happiness in those moments creates longing. Longing creates vulnerability. Vulnerability creates fear. So Rick deflects. He creates distance. He hides behind intellectual conversation. He pretends that emotional connection is beneath him. It is not beneath him. It terrifies him. With Summer, Rick distrusts the happiness of mutual understanding. Summer sees parts of him that others overlook. She notices his moments of weakness and his attempts at improvement. These moments create a warmth in Rick that he does not know how to manage. Happiness derived from understanding feels too close to acceptance, and acceptance feels too close to exposure. So he keeps her at arm's length, not because he does not value her, but because he values her too much. With Jerry, Rick distrusts the happiness of forgiveness. Jerry forgives easily. Jerry sees good in Rick that Rick does not see in himself. The idea that someone could forgive him without demanding change confuses Rick. It makes him uncomfortable. Happiness built on forgiveness feels unstable, like it could disappear at any moment. Rick mocks Jerry to avoid acknowledging the strange comfort Jerry brings him. Rick distrusts happiness even in small moments. A quiet evening with his family makes him anxious. A peaceful adventure makes him suspicious. A kind word makes him retreat. He fears that every positive moment is temporary and that the universe is preparing to take something from him as punishment for letting his guard down. Happiness heightens anticipation of loss. That anticipation haunts him. Rick also distrusts happiness because he does not trust himself. He fears that his presence in the lives of others will ultimately cause harm. Happiness makes him feel responsible for maintaining the well-being of people he believes he has already damaged. That responsibility feels like a burden he is afraid to carry. When happiness appears, Rick's instinct is to sabotage it. Not because he wants to destroy joy, but because he hopes destroying it himself will hurt less than waiting for someone else to destroy it. The pattern of distrusting happiness is visible in the way Rick treats good moments. When he laughs sincerely, he immediately makes a joke to break the tension. When he experiences a rare moment of peace, he creates conflict to avoid the feeling. When he shares a vulnerable moment with someone, he follows it with withdrawal. When he begins to feel proud of someone he loves, he distances himself so they cannot see the softness in his expression. These reactions are not random, they are protective. They are the survival strategy of a man who learned long ago that happiness is a precursor to pain. Rick also distrusts happiness because he sees the universe for what it is. He sees its chaos. He sees its unpredictability. He sees its fragility. Most people experience happiness without understanding the fragility of existence. Rick sees the fragility in excruciating detail. He sees how quickly life can change, how easily loved ones can disappear, how violently stability can collapse. This perspective twists happiness into something frightening, something with a countdown attached, something that cannot be trusted. But despite all his distrust, Rick still dreams of happiness, quietly, secretly, against his own beliefs. He dreams of a life where he feels at ease, a life where guilt loosens its grip, a life where he does not fear losing everyone he loves, a life where he can sit at a table with his family and feel whole instead of terrified. Rick carries these dreams in the deepest part of his heart, where fear cannot entirely extinguish them. When Rick experiences genuine happiness, even for a moment, something inside him softens, his eyes linger, his voice lowers, his movements slow. He becomes still enough to feel the possibility of peace. These moments frighten him, but they also reveal the truth he hides. He wants happiness. He wants it desperately. He simply does not trust it. He believes happiness is temporary, but pain is permanent, and so he prepares for pain even when happiness is present. One day, Rick may learn that happiness does not always end in loss. He may learn that joy does not always precede tragedy. He may understand that happiness is not a trap, but a reminder that life still holds soft moments worth reaching for. But until he learns that truth, Rick will continue to distrust happiness, guarding his heart from joy because joy once destroyed him. He will continue to run from warmth because warmth reminds him of the cold that came after, and he will continue to deny himself the comfort he longs for, believing that distance protects him, when in reality, it only deepens his loneliness. Rick Sanchez has survived things that no ordinary mind or body should be able to endure. He has lived through infinite catastrophes, crossed realities that bend logic, faced threats that could collapse entire worlds, and endured emotional devastation that would destroy most people. Rick has survived it all, and the world around him treats that survival as proof of strength. But Rick confuses survival with healing, and that confusion shapes his life in ways he does not fully understand. Survival is something he excels at. Healing is something he avoids instinctively. The danger in Rick's worldview is that he believes survival and healing are the same, when in reality they are distant, almost opposing processes. Rick survives by shutting down emotionally. Healing requires him to open up. He knows how to endure, but he does not know how to mend. The reason Rick confuses survival with healing traces back to the most painful moment of his life. Whatever happened in his past, whatever loss or tragedy tore his world apart, left him so shattered that survival became his only priority. He did not have the luxury of healing. He did not have the ability to process the pain. All he could do was endure it. So, he adapted. He reshaped himself into someone who could function without feeling, someone who could keep moving forward even while carrying a heart full of grief. Rick built his identity around resilience, not recovery. Over time, he forgot there was a difference. Rick's survival mechanisms are everywhere in his behavior. They appear in the way he jokes to avoid sincerity. They appear in the way he drinks to avoid memory. They appear in the way he isolates to avoid vulnerability. They appear in the way he distracts himself with inventions, adventures, and chaos. These behaviors keep him alive psychologically, but they do not heal him. They are strategies designed to keep his emotional system from collapsing entirely. Rick uses them so consistently that he mistakes the absence of collapse for healing. But numbness is not healing. Silence is not healing. Avoidance is not healing. Rick survives by avoiding the wound, not by treating it. Rick confuses survival with healing because he was never taught emotional care. Genius shaped him intellectually, but it did nothing to teach him how to process grief. He understands physics, chemistry, biology, and theoretical science at a level no one else can comprehend, but he does not understand how to soothe his heart. He does not understand how to trust softness. He does not understand how to let himself cry without numbing the feeling. He does not understand how to talk honestly about what happened to him. He does not understand how to lean on others. Rick knows how to survive pain, but he does not know how to move beyond it. This confusion affects every relationship in his life. With Morty, Rick believes that showing up after causing emotional damage is enough. He believes that because he is present, physically, he is present emotionally. But Morty needs more than survival. Morty needs healing. And Rick does not know how to provide that. He gives Morty adventure when Morty needs comfort. He gives Morty danger when Morty needs reassurance. He gives Morty intelligence when Morty needs gentleness. Rick believes these gestures are proof that he cares, but they often reveal his misunderstanding. Being there is not the same as making things right. With Beth, Rick believes that returning to her life is enough. He thinks survival means sticking around, even if his emotional presence is inconsistent. Beth wants healing. She wants acknowledgement of the pain he caused. She wants recognition that his absence shaped her identity. She wants an apology he cannot give, because apologies require facing emotions he refuses to confront. Rick loves Beth, but he offers her survival instead of healing. He returns physically but avoids the emotional repair she needs. With Summer, Rick believes that treating her as capable is proof of respect. But Summer needs more than that. She needs stability. She needs emotional grounding. She needs to know she matters beyond her usefulness. Rick gives her confidence, but not healing. He puts her in situations that challenge her, but he rarely supports her through the emotional consequences. Rick sees growth as healing, but growth without support can create new wounds. He does not see that distinction. With Jerry, Rick believes that tolerance is enough. He believes that survival means coexistence, but Jerry wants to be understood, not just tolerated. Rick uses survival strategies in place of connection. He confuses endurance with empathy. He believes that because he has not abandoned the family, he has healed the damage his presence caused. But existing beside someone is not the same as reconciling with them. Rick confuses survival with healing for one painful reason. Healing requires vulnerability. Vulnerability requires honesty. Honesty requires confronting the grief he buried. And that grief is so heavy that Rick fears it will destroy him if he lets it surface. So he keeps surviving. He buries the grief deeper. He builds more walls. He distracts himself with more chaos. He tells himself he is fine because he is still moving. But mobility is not emotional progress. It is avoidance disguised as strength. Another reason Rick confuses the two is because survival has always been rewarded in his life. People marvel at his intelligence. They admire his capacity for endurance. They praise him for slipping out of impossible situations. They rely on him for solutions. These expectations reinforce the belief that survival defines worth. Rick sees himself through the lens of what he can endure, not what he can heal. His identity is built on surviving the impossible. Healing feels unfamiliar and therefore unnecessary. Rick also confuses survival with healing because survival creates a false sense of normal. When you endure pain long enough, it becomes familiar. It becomes predictable. It becomes your baseline. Rick lives in a state of emotional tension so consistently that he cannot distinguish it from stability. When he feels numb, he thinks he is healed. When he feels nothing, he thinks he is safe. When he feels detached, he thinks he is in control. Rick does not realize that these states are symptoms of unhealed trauma, not signs of recovery. This confusion also appears in the way Rick handles guilt. He believes that enduring guilt silently is the same as atoning for his mistakes. He punishes himself internally and believes this suffering compensates for the harm he caused. But guilt without healing leads to cycles of self-destruction. Rick believes survival through guilt is redemption. It is not. It is a prison he built himself. Rick also misinterprets healing as weakness. When he sees others confront their emotions, cry, admit mistakes, or seek help, He interprets those actions as vulnerabilities. Vulnerability frightens him because vulnerability once preceded heartbreak. Rick believes that healing requires lowering the defenses that kept him alive, and he fears that letting down his guard will expose him to another devastating loss. So he clings to survival because it feels stronger, safer, and more predictable. But the cost of confusing survival with healing is immense. Rick's relationships remain fractured, his guilt remains heavy, his loneliness grows, his internal collapse worsens, his patterns repeat. He remains stuck emotionally at the moment his life fell apart. He is alive, but he is not living. He moves, but he does not progress. He survives, but he does not heal. The tragedy of Rick's confusion is that he has moments where healing tries to reach him, when Morty forgives him, when Beth shows him tenderness, when Summer understands him, when Jerry accepts him. These moments are invitations to heal, but Rick mistakes them for reminders that he must stay guarded. He deflects the healing with jokes. He distances himself. He sabotages the moment. Not because he does not want connection, but because connection threatens the survival identity he built. One day, Rick might understand the difference between surviving and healing. He might realize that healing requires allowing himself to be seen. It requires acknowledging pain without numbing it. It requires leaning on the people who still love him. It requires admitting he cannot do everything alone. It requires trusting that vulnerability does not always lead to loss. Rick may learn these truths slowly, painfully, and imperfectly. But healing is possible, even for him. Until that day comes, Rick will continue to confuse survival with healing. He will continue to run from stillness, avoid vulnerability, suppress emotion, and protect the wound that defines him. He will survive brilliantly, but he will not heal. And as long as he believes survival is enough, he will remain trapped in the cycle that began
the moment he lost the life he once loved.
Rick Sanchez exists in a multiverse filled with infinite versions of himself. Some are brilliant, some are monstrous, some are peaceful, some are lonely, some are kinder, more grounded, more present. Some are colder, more bitter, more detached. Rick has seen his counterparts succeed in ways he never could, and fail in ways he fears he might. He has watched their lives unfold in countless different directions, each one shaped by choices, circumstances, relationships, and tragedies. And through it all, Rick has developed a quiet belief that these versions of himself are not possibilities. They are reminders that he is the version who does not deserve to change, the version who cannot change, the version who was shaped by pain into someone permanently damaged. Every alternate version of Rick becomes emotional evidence that he is stuck. Rick's understanding of himself was never simple, even before he encountered the multiverse. He always held a fractured sense of identity, shaped by loss, genius, guilt, and emotional avoidance. But once he discovered the existence of countless alternate Ricks, that fracture became deeper. Instead of seeing the multiverse as proof that change is possible, he interpreted it as proof that change is something that belongs to other versions, not him. Rick looks at the multiverse and sees possibility, but not for himself. He sees potential, but not his own. He sees versions of himself who overcame their demons and believes he cannot because his pain feels too fixed. When Rick looks at the multiverse, he does not see opportunity. He sees judgment. Every alternate Rick is a reflection of what he is not. If another Rick became a better father, it means he failed. If another Rick found emotional peace, it means he is incapable of finding it. If another Rick became crueler, it confirms the fear that he is only a few bad choices away from complete collapse. If another Rick built a stable life, it reminds him that he destroyed his. Every counterpart becomes a quiet accusation, a reminder of the ways in which Rick believes he ruined his own life. This belief is fueled by Rick's relationship with guilt. Rick carries guilt like a permanent companion. He blames himself for losses he could not control, tragedies he could not prevent, and outcomes he could not predict. His guilt is not rational, it is emotional. It is shaped by grief, fear, and trauma. When he sees a version of himself who succeeded, it reinforces the belief that he personally failed. When he sees a version who spiraled further into darkness, it reinforces the belief that he is dangerous. In Rick's mind, the multiverse does not prove that he has options. It proves that he made the wrong ones. Rick sees himself as the broken version, the version who lost too much, the version whose grief poisoned his potential, the version who cannot recover, the version who cannot forgive himself. When he looks at other Ricks, he feels a sharp separation between
who he is and who he might have been. That separation grows every time he encounters a version of himself who represents the path he abandoned, the path where he stayed with his family, the path where he embraced vulnerability, the path where he sought healing. Rick does not see these versions as inspirational. He sees them as evidence that he is unworthy of those outcomes. Rick also fears change because change requires vulnerability. Becoming a better version of himself requires facing the grief he buried. It requires acknowledging the wound that defined him. It requires admitting that he still loves the people he lost. Rick cannot face that pain, so he convinces himself that change is impossible. He convinces himself that his identity is fixed. He convinces himself that the multiverse proves he cannot evolve. If he tells himself he cannot change, he does not have to try. And if he does not try, he does not risk failing. Rick's encounters with other versions of himself also reinforce his belief that pain is inevitable. He has seen Ricks who hardened themselves, Ricks who became ruthless, Ricks who abandoned their families, Ricks who embraced nihilism, Ricks who became tyrants. These versions confirm Rick's fear that darkness is inherent to him, that he is destined to hurt others, that choosing change would only delay the inevitable downward spiral. Rick sees every negative version of himself as a warning, and every positive version as a fantasy he does not deserve. Another painful layer to this belief is Rick's relationship with self-worth. Rick does not believe he deserves joy, connection, or healing. He believes he ruined his chance. He believes he caused too much damage. He believes he pushed away too many people. He believes the guilt he carries is justified punishment. When he sees versions of himself who are happy, he feels excluded from that possibility. When he sees versions of himself who are forgiven, he believes that forgiveness cannot be for him. When he sees versions who grew emotionally, he believes that growth is reserved for people who have not committed the same mistakes. Rick also struggles with the idea that change would require letting go of the identity he built to survive. Becoming a better version of himself means becoming someone unfamiliar, someone who is not defined by bitterness or alcohol or chaos, someone who is capable of softness. Rick fears that change would make him vulnerable again. Vulnerability led to heartbreak once, and that heartbreak shaped him. Losing the identity built from that heartbreak feels like a betrayal of the pain he survived. To Rick, changing would mean admitting that the suffering was not the core of who he is. This belief affects Rick's relationships deeply. With Morty, he sometimes allows himself brief moments of tenderness, but he always retreats. He tells himself he cannot change enough to be the grandfather Morty wants. He convinces himself that staying distant is better.
When Morty tries to pull closeness from him, Rick withdraws not because he does not care, but because he fears he will hurt Morty by trying to be someone he believes he cannot become. With Beth, Rick sees the versions of himself who stayed in her life, and he compares them to the version who left. This comparison feeds his belief that he failed her in ways he cannot fix. When Beth seeks connection, Rick feels the weight of that comparison and distances himself emotionally. He believes he is too damaged to be the father she deserves. With Summer, Rick occasionally sees the potential for trust. She sees parts of him that others miss. But Rick fears that allowing Summer to know him deeply will expose him to emotional accountability. He believes he cannot become the version of himself Summer hopes he could be, so he holds back. convinced that he is avoiding disappointment. With Jerry, Rick sees a version of himself reflected through contrast. Jerry represents emotional vulnerability and the capacity for growth. Jerry learns, Jerry adapts, Jerry forgives. Rick sees in Jerry a quality he does not believe he possesses. This comparison threatens him. It reminds him of what he lost by choosing cynicism over openness. Rick distances himself from Jerry because Jerry's emotional intelligence reveals Rick's emotional fear. Rick also interprets the entire citadel as a symbol of his failure. The citadel is a place built from the idea that Ricks are fundamentally similar. It is a representation of what Ricks become when they cling to superiority and control. Rick despises the citadel because it shows him a collective reflection of his worst traits. He sees conformity where he craves uniqueness. He sees cruelty where he desires compassion. He sees emptiness where he once felt possibility. The citadel confirms his belief that Ricks cannot change. And if Ricks cannot change, then he cannot either. But the tragedy of Rick's perspective is that he ignores the truth hidden in the multiverse. If there are infinite versions of Rick, then every version is possible. If there is a Rick who healed, then healing is possible. If there is a Rick who became softer, then softness is possible. If there is a Rick who stayed with his family, then loyalty is possible. If there is a Rick who grew emotionally, then growth is possible. Rick refuses to see that potential because acknowledging it would force him to ask a painful question. Why not me? Rick fears that answer, because the answer might be that he chose not to heal. Rick has spent his life believing he is the broken version, the damaged version, the lost version. But the truth is that he is not incapable of change. He is afraid of it. He fears losing the emotional armor he built. He fears being vulnerable again. He fears becoming someone who can be hurt. He fears that if he tries and fails, it will confirm every terrible thing he believes about himself. But Rick also underestimates himself. He underestimates his capacity to grow. He underestimates his desire for connection. He underestimates the strength it takes to survive heartbreak. He underestimates the part of him that still loves deeply, even when he pretends not to. The multiverse does not prove that Rick cannot change. It proves that he can. It proves that there are versions of him who made different choices, versions who healed, versions who loved, versions who forgave themselves. Rick sees every version of himself as proof that he does not deserve to change, but one day he may understand the truth. The multiverse does not judge him. It reflects him. It shows him who he was, who he is, and who he could be. If he ever allows himself to believe that healing is possible, he might find the courage to take the first step. He might learn that he is not defined by the worst version of himself. He might learn that he deserves to grow. He might learn that change is not betrayal. Change is hope. Rick Sanchez would never admit he is searching for anything. He insists he understands everything, controls everything, and sees the universe with clarity unmatched by anyone else. But beneath the sarcasm, beneath the wandering through galaxies, beneath the inventions that rewrite physics, there is a quieter truth shaping his every action. Rick is searching for redemption, not consciously, not intentionally, and never openly. But the pattern is there in his choices, his contradictions, his moments of softness, and his relentless return to the people he claims to have outgrown. Rick searches for redemption because there is a wound inside him that refuses to heal, a wound caused by loss, guilt, and the fear that he became the worst version of himself. But at the same time, Rick does not believe redemption exists for him. He believes he crossed a point of no return long ago, and that belief shapes the tragedy of his character. To Rick, redemption is something other people earn. Redemption is for the innocent, the hurt, the ones who lost control without meaning to, the ones who did not know better. Rick knows better. Rick always knows better. That is the curse of his genius. He sees every consequence, every possibility, every ripple of every action. When he hurts someone, he knows it. When he pushes someone away, he knows what it will cost. When he chooses selfishness, he understands the price. That awareness convinces him that redemption cannot be for him because he was never ignorant. He believes he deserves every pain he carries because he caused pain knowingly. Rick's search for redemption appears subtly when he is with Morty. He returns for Morty again and again, even after insisting he does not need him. He protects Morty not out of pride, but out of guilt and longing. Morty represents the chance to do something right. Morty reminds Rick of who he was before he hardened. Every time Rick chooses Morty, even through conflict and carelessness, he is reaching for a version of himself who could still nurture something good. When he teaches Morty something useful, when he shows concern, when he tries to spare him from emotional damage, Rick is searching for redemption. But when the moment ends, Rick pulls away, convinced that any progress he made is undone by his flaws. With Beth, Rick's search becomes even more complicated. Beth represents the failure he cannot forget. In every timeline, Rick carries guilt for the life she led without him. He believes he ruined her, or abandoned her, or shaped her into someone who carries his emotional wounds without understanding where they came from. When Rick tries to be present in Beth's life, it is an attempt at redemption disguised as awkward affection. When he supports her choices, even reluctantly, it is a quiet way of telling her he wants to be better. But Rick does not believe he can heal the damage he caused. So every moment of closeness is followed by withdrawal. He believes any real redemption is impossible because he thinks he arrived too late. Summer represents a different angle of Rick's search. She challenges him, understands him, and sees parts of him that even he tries to hide. Rick respects her in ways he refuses to articulate. In moments when Summer confronts him, he listens more than he admits. These are moments where redemption feels possible because Summer does not demand perfection from him. She accepts his contradictions without expecting him to change overnight. But Rick fears letting her down. He fears influencing her negatively. His attempts to guide her or protect her are shaped by a desire to offer her something meaningful, but he always stops short of genuine vulnerability because he believes offering his true self would harm her, not help her. This belief prevents him from embracing the redemption she unintentionally offers him. Jerry is the most surprising mirror for Rick's search for redemption. Jerry forgives easily. Jerry is patient. Jerry is unthreatening. Jerry sees Rick's flaws but does not weaponize them. Jerry does not demand anything from Rick except tolerance. In Jerry's presence, Rick becomes strangely aware of how much he has emotionalized intelligence and weaponized it. Rick sometimes feels embarrassed around Jerry because Jerry's simplicity reveals Rick's self-inflicted complexity. When Rick occasionally defends Jerry or shows him small kindnesses, it is a step toward redemption. But those steps are shaky because Rick cannot accept the idea that someone like Jerry could forgive someone like him so easily. He interprets Jerry's forgiveness as pity, and pity is unbearable to Rick. Rick's search for redemption is also visible in the way he handles danger. He often throws himself into the most reckless situations, not because he is fearless, but because part of him hopes that surviving will mean something. That saving a world, or a planet, or even just one person might balance the emotional scales tipping heavily against him. Yet, when the moment passes, he dismisses it as meaningless. Rick desperately wants his actions to matter, but he cannot allow himself to believe they do. Redemption requires acknowledging value in his choices, and Rick views himself as someone unworthy of that validation. Rick also seeks redemption through his intelligence. He believes if he invents enough, understands enough, or controls enough, he might eventually create something that compensates for his pain. He treats intelligence as a path to absolution, but intelligence cannot fix emotional wounds. His inventions solve problems but do not solve him. His genius creates new worlds, but does not rebuild the one he lost. Rick continues to push the limits of science, hoping it will give him something that resembles closure. It never does, but he cannot stop searching. Rick's search appears again in his rare moments of honesty. He will occasionally let a truth slip, a confession too raw to be disguised.
Completely. A comment that reveals the loneliness beneath his arrogance. A moment where his voice softens around someone he cares about. These moments are not accidents. They are attempts to bridge the emotional gap he created. They are Rick reaching towards something he fears he cannot have. They are glimpses of the man he could be if he believed redemption was possible. But as soon as he realizes what he has revealed, he retreats. The vulnerability frightens him more than the loneliness. Rick does not believe redemption exists for him because redemption requires forgiveness. Forgiving himself is impossible for him. He holds himself to standards no one else could ever reach. He believes every mistake he made is permanent. He believes every person he hurt carries a wound he caused. He believes moving forward would erase the memory of the people he lost, and he refuses to do that. Rick clings to pain because pain is the only part of his past he knows how to preserve. Healing feels like betrayal. Redemption feels like forgetting. Rick believes letting go of guilt means letting go of the love he once had, and he is unwilling to lose it twice. But the truth is that Rick's search for redemption is proof that he is not beyond saving. His longing reveals hope he will never admit to. He is haunted not because he is heartless, but because he cares too much. He carries guilt not because he is irredeemable, but because he is capable of remorse. He returns to his family not because he has nowhere else to go, but because part of him believes they anchor him to the version of himself he wishes he could become. These actions contradict his belief that redemption is impossible. They show that he searches for it anyway, even in denial. Rick wants redemption, desperately, quietly, in secret. He wants to be more than a collection of trauma responses. He wants to be someone who can love without fear. He wants to be someone who can stay. He wants to be someone who can apologize. He wants to be someone who can forgive himself. But he believes that the damage he carries is too deep, too old, too permanent. He believes he does not deserve a second chance, even though he yearns for one. One day, Rick might learn that redemption is not something you earn with perfection. Redemption is not something you buy with guilt. Redemption is not something you achieve through intelligence. Redemption is something that grows when you let others see your pain, when you admit your mistakes, when you try to be better, even if you fail. Rick has already taken these steps without acknowledging them. He has already sought closeness. He has already shown love. He has already demonstrated change, even if he views those moments as insignificant. The final tragedy, and perhaps the quiet hope of Rick Sanchez, is that he already is redeemable. He always was. He just has to believe it, and believing it may be the hardest journey he ever faces. If he ever opens himself enough to see that
redemption is not reserved for a different version of him, he might finally understand the truth the universe has been showing him quietly for years. Redemption is not out of reach. It is waiting for him at every moment he chooses connection over fear. At every moment he chooses love over avoidance. At every moment he chooses to stay instead of run. Until then, Rick searches blindly, carrying his guilt across galaxies, never realizing that the redemption he seeks is woven into every fragile act of care he shows. It lives in every attempt to protect Morty, every hesitant apology to Beth, every moment of respect for Summer, every reluctant kindness toward Jerry. Rick is searching for redemption, but the tragedy is that he already walks alongside it, not yet ready to believe it could belong to him.